She kept every document in a locked box under her bed, every contract, every agreement, evidence of the empire she was building while everyone thought she was just a waitress with a smart kid. Orrin would come home exhausted from his workshop, collapse at the kitchen table, and she'd make him tea. Listen to him talk about his day, about the progress he was making, about his dreams of changing the world. "You're going to do it," she'd tell him, her voice steady. "I believe in you." What she didn't say was that she wasn't just believing. She was building. Stone by stone, contract by contract, she was constructing the platform that would launch him into history. And while he slept, she was building the empire that would one day save his. The Global Tech Summit filled the convention center with the kind of people who changed the world before breakfast. Dorian Kells adjusted his tie and tried to look like he belonged among them. Once his name opened doors. Now those same doors were closing, slowly but surely, and everyone in this room could smell the desperation on him like cheap cologne. He'd come looking for investors, for someone, anyone, who still believed the Kells name meant innovation. Instead, he found himself drawn to the main stage where a young man stood in front of a screen showing impossible things. Orrin Vale. The name meant nothing to Dorian. Just another young genius trying to make his mark. But something about the presentation grabbed him, held him. "The Aurora Core doesn't just recycle energy," Orrin said, his voice carrying across the packed auditorium. "It reimagines our entire relationship with power. Every movement, every action, every bit of wasted kinetic energy becomes fuel. We're not taking from the earth anymore. We're taking from ourselves." The screen behind him showed simulations. Buildings lighting up from footsteps. Cities powered by traffic. A world transformed. Dorian found himself clapping along with everyone else. Found himself wanting what this kid had. That certainty. That vision. The kind of passion Dorian had lost somewhere between his mother's expectations and his own failures. After the presentation, investors swarmed Orrin like sharks sensing blood. But good blood. Profitable blood. Dorian watched from a distance as the young man fielded questions with grace beyond his years. Saw the way he commanded respect without demanding it. In his hotel room that night, Dorian researched Vale Innovations. A small company, barely 2 years old but growing fast, backed by mysterious investors. The Aurora Core had already secured contracts worth millions. This kid was going places Dorian had only dreamed of. He picked up his phone and made a call to his assistant. "Give me everything you can on Orrin Vale and his company. I want to know who's backing him. I want to know his trajectory." He paused. "And reach out. Tell them Kells Dynamics would be interested in a partnership." What Dorian couldn't know, was that 300 miles away, Serena sat in her kitchen and watched the same presentation on her laptop. Tears streamed down her face as she listened to her son's voice amplified across the world. She'd known this day was coming, had planned for it, but nothing prepared her for the reality of seeing him up there, seeing him shine, seeing the world finally recognize what she'd always known. Her phone buzzed with a notification, an email from one of her shell company accounts, a meeting request from Kells Dynamics. Her hand trembled as she read Dorian's name. After 14 years of silence, of distance, of building a life he knew nothing about, fate was pulling them back together. But not as lovers, not as equals, as something else entirely. She closed the laptop and sat in the darkness, thinking, planning. The pendant at her throat felt heavier than usual, a reminder of who she'd been and who she'd become. Orrin came home an hour later, buzzing with energy. "Mom, you won't believe it. 3 major investors want to meet. And some big company, Kells something, they want to talk about partnership." Serena's blood went cold, then hot, then cold again. She kept her face neutral. "That's wonderful, honey. You okay? You look pale." She smiled, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "I'm perfect. Just proud of you." But inside, her mind was racing, calculating, preparing for the moment she'd known would come, but hoped she'd have more time for. The moment Dorian would reach out for help. And destiny had already signed the terms. The newspaper hit Dorian's desk like a judge's gavel, and the headline might as well have been his execution notice. Vale Innovations saves Kells Dynamics from bankruptcy. Young Visionary Rescues Failing Empire. His hands shook as he read the article. 6 weeks had passed since the tech summit. 6 weeks of negotiations with Oren Vale and his team. Of meetings where Dorian had smiled and pitched partnership while internally begging for survival. And now the whole world knew. The great Kells dynamics reduced to charity case. Saved by a kid young enough to be his son. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't destroying him. 300 miles away, Serena stood in her kitchen, the same newspaper spread across the table. Her hands trembled for different reasons. The article showed Oren's face, showed the Vale Tower groundbreaking, showed the contract that had transferred enough capital to keep Kells Dynamics afloat in exchange for exclusive rights to their distribution network. She'd orchestrated this. Through her shell companies, through carefully worded contracts, she positioned Oren to be Dorian's savior without either of them knowing the real story. The Aurora Core's initial concept had come from Dorian's own discarded blueprints. The very ideas he'd abandoned were now the only things keeping his company alive. She'd turned his rejection into a legacy, his trash into treasure, his abandoned dreams into the rope that would either save him or hang him, depending on how you looked at it. If you've ever turned pain into purpose, comment legacy. Your story matters. The article mentioned something else too. Something that made Serena's chest tighten. A gala. A celebration of the partnership. An event where Dorian Kells and Oren Vale would appear together, cementing the deal that had saved one empire and launched another. She'd been invited. As Oren's mother. As the woman who'd raised the genius everyone was talking about. The invitation sat on her counter, cream-colored and elegant, mocking her with its formality. For 2 weeks, she stared at that invitation, picked it up, put it down, tried to imagine what she'd say if she came face-to-face with Dorian after 14 years. Would he even recognize her? She'd been 23 then, soft and hopeful. Now she was 37, harder in all the ways that mattered, softer in others. Oren noticed her distraction. "Mom, you okay? You've been weird since the newspaper article." "Just thinking about how far we've come," she said, which wasn't a lie. Just not the whole truth. The real truth lived in that locked box under her bed. In the blueprints she'd saved. In the pendants she still wore. In every choice she'd made to protect Oren from knowing that his father was the man whose company he'd just saved. The man who'd thrown them away like they were nothing. She'd kept Dorian's research. Preserved it when he'd given up. Given it to their son without explanation. And now, through Oren's brilliance and her planning, Dorian's own abandoned dreams had circled back to save him. The universe had a sense of humor, apparently. Or maybe just perfect timing. The night before the gala, Serena stood in front of her closet and made a decision. She'd spent 14 years invisible. 14 years building in shadows. 14 years letting the world think she'd disappeared. Tomorrow, she'd let them see her. Really see her. Not as the girl who'd been rejected. As the woman who'd risen anyway. But Dorian wasn't done yet. He wanted redemption. And she was about to face him again. The glass office on the 42nd floor had views that made men forget they were mortal, and Dorian Kells needed that illusion more than ever. Oren Vale sat across from him, dressed in a simple navy suit that somehow made Dorian's expensive Italian tailoring look desperate. The kid had presence. The thing you couldn't buy or fake. That thing Dorian had spent his whole life trying to manufacture and never quite achieved. "Your distribution network is solid," Oren said, reviewing documents on his tablet. "With our technology and your infrastructure, we can reach markets neither of us could touch alone." Dorian nodded, trying to focus on business. Try not to think about how this meeting represented everything he'd failed to become. The Aurora Core is revolutionary. I'll admit, when I first saw your presentation, I thought it was too ambitious. But you've delivered on every promise. My mother taught me that promises mean nothing if you don't back them up. Oren said, something sharp in his voice. The words hung in the air. Dorian felt them land like small cuts, though he couldn't say why. "Smart woman. The smartest I know." Oren's eyes met his, steady and measuring. "She raised me alone. Worked 3 jobs so I could have the materials I needed. Never complained. Never gave up. even when everyone told her she was crazy for believing in me. Dorian shifted uncomfortably. There was something in the way Oren talked about his mother. Something that felt like accusation, though Dorian couldn't imagine why. They'd never met before the tech summit. This was just business. You're lucky to have her support, Dorian said carefully. I'm lucky she didn't vanish when things got hard. Oren's voice was calm, almost casual, but the words struck like a hammer. That's the thing about real strength. It shows up. It doesn't just promise and then walk away when someone else tells you to. Before Dorian could respond, before he could process the strange intensity of Oren's words, the office door opened, and Serena walked in. Time stopped. The air went thick and impossible to breathe. Dorian's brain short-circuited, trying to reconcile the woman standing in his doorway with the girl he'd watched walk away in the rain 14 years ago. She wore a navy dress, simple and elegant. Her hair was pulled back. She looked older, stronger, absolutely devastating. Serena, he whispered. She stood there for 10 full seconds, saying nothing, just looking at him with eyes that held 14 years of life he knew nothing about. 14 years of struggle and triumph and transformation. Her silence was more powerful than any speech, more cutting than any accusation. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. Hello, Dorian. Oren stood, moving to his mother's side. His hand found hers, and in that moment, Dorian saw it. The resemblance he'd been too blind to notice. The sharp intelligence in Oren's eyes that mirrored his own. The way he tilted his head when thinking. The shape of his jaw. This is my mother, Oren said, his voice carrying a weight Dorian finally understood. Serena Valley, the woman who built everything you're currently benefiting from. The room spun. Dorian gripped the edge of his desk, his mind racing through calculations. 14 years. The age matched. The timing matched. The way Serena looked at him with something between pity and triumph matched. You, he started but couldn't finish. Serena's expression didn't change. I forgave you, Dorian. Years ago, I forgave you for choosing silence. For choosing your mother's approval over us. For letting me walk away in the rain, carrying your child. She paused, letting every word land. But forgiveness isn't return. It's freedom. My freedom. From needing anything from you ever again. Dorian felt like he was drowning in air. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. And that's exactly the problem, Oren said quietly. You didn't care enough to find out. He realized too late. The world no longer revolved around his name. Dorian stood on the street outside Vale Tower, watching lights blaze from windows 2 floors above where Kel's Dynamics struggled to survive. The building had gone up fast, 6 months from groundbreaking to completion. Glass and steel reaching toward the sky with the kind of confidence Dorian used to have. The kind Serena and Oren had earned. The kind he'd inherited and squandered. The gala invitation sat unopened on his desk back at the office. Heavy cream cardstock, embossed lettering, celebrating the global launch of Aurora core technology. Black tie, 8 p.m., the event everyone who mattered would attend. He wasn't going, couldn't go. The invitation was a courtesy, maybe, or possibly a final twist of the knife. Either way, seeing Serena and Oren celebrated while he stood in the ruins of his father's legacy felt like more punishment than he could take. Inside Vale Tower, 2 floors above his head, Serena stood in front of a full-length mirror and barely recognized herself. The dress was white and silver, flowing like water, elegant in a way she'd never imagined wearing. Her hair was styled, her makeup subtle, but perfect. She looked like someone important, someone powerful. She looked like she belonged. You ready, Mom? Oren appeared in the doorway, sharp in his tuxedo, grinning with the kind of joy that made every sacrifice worth it. She turned to him, this brilliant boy who'd become a man who was changing the world, and felt her throat tighten with emotion. I've been ready for 14 years, baby. The gala was everything she'd dreamed and nothing she'd expected. Crystal chandeliers, politicians and tech giants, cameras flashing, her son's name on everyone's lips. Vali. Not Kel's. Vali. At the center of the main hall, behind glass, sat the pendant she'd worn for 14 years. The compass Rose Dorian had given her. Now it was mounted on black velvet under soft lighting, with a small plaque beneath, from discarded to divine. The first investment in Aurora Vale Holdings. She turned his gift into a symbol, his rejection into her foundation, his silence into her story. Oren shook hands with world leaders, signed contract worth hundreds of millions, made promises he'd actually keep. And through it all, Serena stood nearby, no longer invisible, no longer the girl who'd walked away in the rain, the woman the world rose to meet. If you know your worth can't be defined by rejection, like comments still rising, and share this story with someone who needs to remember their light. Outside, Dorian watched through the windows he couldn't bring himself to enter. Watched Serena laugh. Watched Oren shine. Watched the life he could have had if he'd been brave enough to choose love over approval. Strong enough to choose truth over silence. The next morning, Serena stood on the rooftop terrace of Vale Tower as dawn broke over the city. The ocean breeze lifted her hair. Her eyes were closed. She was peaceful in a way she'd never been at 23. She'd walked through fire and become something unbreakable. Had turned heartbreak into heritage. Had proven that rejection wasn't the end of the story, just the beginning of a better one. She wasn't the girl he left behind. She was the woman the world rose to meet. Once discarded, now divine. Once rejected, now revered. From heartbreak to heritage. The sun rose higher. The city woke up. And Serena Vale stood at the center of the empire she'd built in silence. The mother of the son who'd changed everything. The woman who'd proven that the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so completely yourself that the person who rejected you becomes irrelevant. Thank you for watching this story. If it moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have more inspiring stories of love, strength, and triumph coming to this channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about a time you turned rejection into power. Your story might inspire someone who needs to hear it today. Remember, we don't break. We become. The night she was rejected with her unborn child, her silence was louder than any goodbye. Rain hammered against the windows of the Kells estate like 1,000 angry fists. Inside, the marble floors gleamed cold and perfect, reflecting the crystal chandeliers that hung overhead like frozen tears. Serena stood in the center of that vast entryway, her hand trembling as it clutched the folded letter from Dr. Morrison's office. 8 weeks along. The words blurred in her mind as she looked up at the two people who had just shattered her world. Claudine Kell stood with her arms crossed, diamonds glittering at her throat like sharp little teeth. Her lips were pressed into a thin line of disgust. Dorian stood beside his mother, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed somewhere over Serena's shoulder. Anywhere but her face. The man who had whispered promises in her ear just 3 months ago couldn't even look at her now. "You understand why this is impossible," Claudine said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade through silk. "My son has a future, a legacy to uphold. You're a sweet girl, Serena, but you're not part of that picture." Serena's throat burned. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the letter at Dorian's feet and demand he say something, anything. But the words stuck in her chest, heavy and suffocating. She looked at him one last time, willing him to meet her eyes. To remember the night by the lighthouse when he'd told her she was the only real thing in his manufactured life. He said nothing. If you've ever been rejected when all you offered was love, hit that like button right now. Comments still rising if you've ever had to walk away stronger. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The rain soaked through her coat before she even reached the end of the driveway. Her suitcase felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but she didn't stop. She didn't look back. One hand gripped the handle. The other rested protectively over her stomach, over the tiny life growing inside her that Dorian would never know, that Claudine would never control. Her shoes splashed through puddles as the iron gates closed behind her with a final, echoing clang. The sound felt like a door slamming on everything she'd hoped for, everything she believed in. But as the cold rain mixed with the hot tears on her cheeks, something else stirred inside her. Something harder than heartbreak. Something sharper than grief. She stopped at the edge of the property, rain streaming down her face, and whispered to the child only she knew about. "We'll be fine, my little one." Her voice cracked, but her spine straightened. "We don't need him. We don't need any of them." The city lights blurred in the distance through the storm. Somewhere out, there was a life she'd have to build from nothing. A future she'd have to forge alone. But standing there in the rain, cast out and abandoned, Serena made a promise that would echo through the decades to come. She would survive this. She would rise. And one day, the name Dorian Kells would mean nothing compared to what she and her child would build together. But she had a secret, one that would take decades to unfold, one that would change everything. The baby's first cry shattered the silence of the cottage like dawn breaking through darkness. Serena lay back against the pillows, her body exhausted, her heart fuller than she'd ever imagined possible. Rain tapped softly against the windows of her small rental in Larkhaven, a fishing town 300 miles from the Kells estate. 300 miles from the life she'd left behind. The midwife, Mrs. Chun, wrapped the baby in a soft blue blanket and placed him in Serena's trembling arms. "He's perfect," Mrs. Chun whispered, her eyes kind. Serena looked down at the tiny face, red and scrunched and absolutely beautiful. His eyes were closed, his little fists curled tight, like he was already ready to fight the world. In that moment, holding him by the dim light of her bedside lamp, everything that had happened at the Kells estate felt like it belonged to someone else's story, some other girl's pain. She traced her finger along his cheek and made a choice that would define both their futures. "Oren," she whispered. "Your name is Orenvale. It means light from the ocean's edge." The name felt right. Strong. Hers. Not Kells. Never Kells. Over the next few weeks, the cottage became their world. Serena would sit in the old rocking chair by the window, Oren cradled against her chest, and hum lullabies her grandmother had taught her. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, she'd catch herself thinking about Dorian, wondering if he ever thought about her, if he ever regretted his silence. Then Oren would shift in her arms, make that little sound babies make when they're dreaming, and the wondering would stop. She didn't need Dorian's regret. She had something infinitely more valuable. One night, when Oren was 6 months old and teething badly, crying despite everything she tried, Serena held him close and whispered the words that would become their mantra. "We don't break, we become." She said it again, rocking him gently. "We don't break, baby. We become something stronger." His crying softened. His tiny hand wrapped around her finger. She still wore the pendant Dorian had given her once, back when his promises felt real. A simple silver thing with a compass rose etched into it. She should have thrown it away, sold it, but something kept her from letting it go. Maybe it was a reminder of who she'd been, or maybe it was proof that she'd survived becoming someone new. The years that followed weren't easy. Serena worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. She cleaned houses in the morning, waited tables at night, and somehow always made it home in time to read Oren his bedtime stories. He grew fast, curious about everything, always asking questions that made her heart ache with pride. But late at night, after Oren fell asleep, she'd sit at the kitchen table and let herself remember. The feel of Dorian's hand in hers. The way he'd looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered. Before his mother's words turned him into stone. Before silence became his final answer. She touched the pendant at her throat and whispered to the darkness, "You have no idea what you threw away." But years later, the world would learn her name again. Through his. 14 years later, their tiny cottage had become a workshop of dreams and salvaged metal. Orenvale sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by circuit boards, copper wire, and pieces of machinery Serena didn't even have names for. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he soldered 2 components together. His tongue stuck out slightly in concentration. At 14, he already had the focused intensity of someone much older. Someone with a purpose. "Mom, watch this," he said without looking up. Serena paused in the doorway, dish towel still in her hands, and watched her son flip a switch on the contraption he'd been building for weeks. A soft blue glow filled the corner of their living room, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. The light was beautiful, almost alive. "What is it?" she asked, moving closer. "Energy conversion," Oren said, his eyes bright with excitement. I'm taking the kinetic energy from our old washing machine motor and converting it into stored light. It's not perfect yet, but Mom, if I can scale this up, if I can make it efficient enough, it could power entire buildings using recycled energy. Serena's chest tightened with pride, so fierce it almost hurt. This brilliant, beautiful boy had grown from that rainy night of rejection into something extraordinary. And he had no idea who his father was. No idea that the man whose blood ran through his veins had thrown them both away like yesterday's trash. She hid that truth behind smiles and encouragement, behind the laughter that filled their small home even when her body ached from double shifts. But sometimes, when Oren wasn't looking, she'd catch herself staring at the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, just like Dorian used to, the same sharp intelligence in his eyes. If you've ever had to rebuild from nothing, hit that subscribe button. You belong in this story. Our story. The pendant still hung around her neck, tucked beneath her work shirt where Oren couldn't see it. A secret she carried, a reminder of promises broken and a love that had turned to ash. But also proof that from that ash, something incredible had grown. You're going to change the world, she told Oren that night, standing in the doorway of his makeshift lab. He looked up at her and grinned. We're going to change it, Mom. Together. But he didn't know the whole truth. Didn't know that the early sketches he'd found in the attic, the ones that had inspired his Aurora core concept, had come from blueprints Dorian Kells had discarded years ago. Technical drawings Serena had rescued from the trash during her brief time at the estate, thinking they were beautiful even if she didn't understand them. She kept them all these years. And when Oren started showing interest in engineering, she'd quietly left them where he could find them. Let him think they were just old papers from his estate sale. Her secret gift to him, Dorian's rejected ideas, reborn through their son's brilliant mind. Outside, the ocean crashed against the rocks. Inside, Oren's invention hummed with possibility. And in her pocket, Serena carried a letter she hadn't yet opened. An invitation to a tech expo where young inventors could pitch their ideas to investors. She'd been waiting for this moment, planning for it. Oren was ready, even if he didn't know it yet. The clock was ticking, and fate was preparing a meeting no one saw coming. 90 days before Kells Dynamics would collapse, Dorian sat in his corner office and lied to himself about control. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city he'd spent 20 years dominating. Steel and glass towers reached toward the sky like fingers grasping at relevance. His company's logo gleamed from the building across the street. Kells Dynamics, the name that was supposed to mean legacy, innovation, power. Instead, it was bleeding money like a wounded animal. The quarterly reports are worse than projected, his CFO said, sliding papers across the mahogany desk. We're losing contracts to newer companies. Investors are nervous. If we don't pivot soon. We'll pivot, Dorian interrupted, his jaw tight. I didn't build this company to watch it crumble. But the truth sat heavy in his chest. He'd built the company on his father's money and his mother's connections. And now, at 42, with Claudine 3 years in the grave, he was finally facing the reality she protected him from. He wasn't innovative. He was a caretaker of someone else's empire. And that empire was dying. He thought about Serena sometimes, usually late at night when the whiskey made him honest. Wonder where she'd ended up. If she'd kept the baby. If she ever thought about him the way he thought about her during those rare moments when his pride cracked open. 300 miles away, in a convention center that smelled like coffee and ambition, Oren Vale stood before a panel of investors and changed everything. The Aurora Core isn't just an energy solution, he said, his voice steady despite his age. It's a revolution. We take discarded kinetic energy, energy that's currently wasted, and we convert it into sustainable power. Imagine buildings that power themselves, cities that run on recycled energy, a world where we stop destroying to create. Serena watched from the back of the room, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. She'd used everything she'd saved to get them here, borrowed money she didn't have, bought Oren the clean shirt he wore on stage. And now she watched her son, her brilliant, beautiful son, command a room full of people who could change their lives forever. The investors leaned forward. Questions flew. Oren answered each one with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're right about something that matters. When it was over, when 3 different firms approached him with cards and promises, Serena slipped into the bathroom and let herself cry. Pride and relief and something else. Something that tasted like vindication. She kept Vale as their surname deliberately, to shield Oren from the Kell's name, to protect him from a legacy of rejection and hollow promises. But also because she knew, somehow, that one day the world would speak the name Vale with a respect it had never shown her. That night, in their hotel room that she could barely afford, Oren appeared on the local news. A feel-good segment about young inventors. Serena watched from the edge of the bed, tears streaming down her face, as her son's face filled the screen. Somewhere in the city, though she didn't know it yet, Dorian Kells saw that same broadcast. Saw the young man with the brilliant idea. Made a note to look into Vale Innovations. And on the 91st day, the man who broke her heart would unknowingly kneel before her son. The prototype exploded at 2 in the morning, filling Oren's workshop with smoke and the acrid smell of burnt circuits. Serena ran from her bedroom, heart hammering, to find her son standing in the wreckage of 6 months of work. The Aurora core's main component lay in pieces on the concrete floor. Melted wires, shattered glass, dreams reduced to smoking debris. Oren's hands were shaking, a small burn already blistering on his forearm. It failed, he whispered, his voice hollow. The investors are coming in 2 weeks, and it failed. She wanted to tell him it would be okay, that they'd figure it out. But the words stuck in her throat because she could see it in his eyes. The same look she'd worn 14 years ago, standing in the rain outside the Kells estate. The look of someone watching their future crumble. Instead, she grabbed the first aid kit and tended to his burn in silence. Then she sat beside him on the floor, right there in the middle of the wreckage, and said the words she'd been saying since he was born. Some storms don't destroy, baby. They define. Oren looked at her, his eyes red. What if I can't fix it? What if this was all just a stupid dream? Then we dream bigger, she said firmly. You know what I learned the night you were born? That the world's going to try to break you. It's going to tell you you're not enough. That your dreams are too big. That you should give up and accept whatever scraps it offers. She took his face in her hands. But we don't break. We become. The next morning, while Oren slept, Serena did something she'd sworn she'd never do. She went to the storage unit where she'd kept a few boxes from her time at the Kells estate. In the very bottom of a plastic container marked old papers, she found them. The original technical drawings. Not the copies she'd left for Oren to find, but Dorian's actual notes. She'd never shown him these. Never told him where the blueprints really came from. But now, spreading them across their kitchen table, she saw something she'd missed before. A notation in Dorian's handwriting about a stabilization method. A solution to the exact problem Oren was facing. Her hands trembled as she traced the words. This was Dorian's genius. The part of him that had been real before his mother's ambition crushed it, and their son had inherited it. But she also saw the stamp across the top of the plans. Project terminated, not commercially viable, DK. Dorian had given up, had let his mother convince him to abandon something revolutionary because it wasn't immediately profitable. And now their son was trying to finish what his father had started, not knowing the connection, not knowing the legacy. Serena carefully placed the papers where Oren would find them when he woke up. Let him think they'd been there all along. Another mystery from the estate sale boxes. She wouldn't tell him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But as she stood by the window, watching the sun rise over Larkhaven, she thought about the hidden power in silence. The strength in secrets kept for the right reasons. She turned Dorian's rejection into fuel, his abandoned dreams into their son's foundation. And soon, so soon, the world would see what rose from those ashes. 3 days later, Oren came running into the house, his eyes wild with excitement. Mom, I found something in those old papers. A solution. I think I can make it work. She smiled, keeping her secrets close. Then make it work, baby. Show them what we're made of. But everything was about to change. The world just didn't know it yet. While the world slept, Serena Vale built an empire in the shadows. 45 days remained before Kel's Dynamics would face its reckoning, though Dorian didn't know it yet. But Serena knew. She'd been watching his company's stock prices, reading the industry reports, tracking every stumble. Not out of spite, out of strategy. Every night, after her shift at the diner ended, she'd come home and transform. Off came the grease-stained apron. On went reading glasses and determination. Her laptop screen glowed in the darkness of their kitchen as she worked through encrypted emails with eco-investors who believed in Oren's vision. Men and women with money who were tired of backing the same old names. Who wanted something new, something revolutionary. She'd registered the shell companies herself. Aurora, Vale Holdings, Ocean Light Industries. 3 different entities, all feeding into Oren's work, all protecting him from exposure until the moment was right. She'd learned corporate structure from library books and YouTube videos, taught herself legal documents at 2 in the morning while her son slept down the hall. Oren worked in his workshop, soldering circuits and running tests, completely unaware that his mother was building the foundation that would hold his dreams. She never told him about the investors she courted, never mentioned the contracts she negotiated in whispered phone calls from the diner's back alley. He doesn't need to know, she'd whisper to herself each night before sleeping. We'll show him when it's time. Her clothes changed too, slowly, deliberately. The threadbare shirts gave way to simple blouses from thrift stores. Then tailored pieces she found on sale. Beige became navy, became the calm confidence of a woman who knew exactly where she was going. She was shedding the girl who'd been rejected, becoming the woman who would rise. One night, as Oren worked late in his lab, Serena stood outside the door and watched his reflection in the glass. Behind him, her own silhouette appeared like a guardian spirit, or maybe a ghost of the future, already claiming its place. She touched the pendant at her throat, still there after all these years. But now it felt different, not like a reminder of what she'd lost, like proof of how far she'd come. The investors wanted meetings. They wanted projections and timelines. They wanted to know if this kid from nowhere could really deliver what he promised. Serena gave them everything they asked for. She learned to speak their language, learned to negotiate like someone who'd been doing this for decades, not months. If this moment moved you, comment "We rise in silence." Because strength doesn't always shout. It builds. By day 30, Aurora Vale Holdings had secured enough backing to take Oren's prototype to manufacturing. By day 20, they had letters of intent from 3 major cities interested in pilot programs. By day 15, Serena had quietly acquired a small office building in the financial district. Not for now, for later, for when the world finally saw what they'd built.